Bates family milestone. Erin and Chad's major $3 million home buy. Dawn arrived slowly, painting a pale light across the walls of a home that had held their entire world for so many years. Gil and Kelly Jo were still sitting together, hands intertwined, their hearts exhausted from the weight of the night. They hadn't slept, but neither of them cared. Some nights weren't meant for sleeping. Some nights existed only to break you open and show you what truly matters. The silence of early morning wrapped around them like a fragile blanket. The house was still, the children still sleeping, unaware of the emotional storm their parents had weathered through the darkness. Gil glanced at the documents lying on the table, the signatures missing, the decision waiting. It felt like those papers were staring back at him, questioning him, pressuring him, reminding him of everything that could go wrong. He let out a long breath, one that carried weeks of fear and responsibility. Kelly watched him, her eyes soft but filled with emotion. She had always believed he was the strongest man she knew, but seeing him this vulnerable reminded her that even strength has limits, and even strong hearts break quietly. Slowly, Kelly reached out and placed her hand on the documents, not to sign them, not to move them, but simply to acknowledge the truth. These papers had taken too much from them already. She whispered softly, her voice trembling, "Gil, if you're not at peace, we shouldn't force ourselves into something that takes our peace away." Those words struck him deeper than anything else. Peace. A simple word, yet the most important one they had slowly been losing. He looked at Kelly, the girl he had married, the mother of his children, the soul of their home. Everything they had built together came from love, sacrifice, and unity. And none of it had ever depended on a house, no matter how beautiful or expensive. Gil's eyes welled, the emotion he had held inside for so long finally breaking the surface. He covered his face with both hands, whispering a quiet confession he had been too afraid to speak. "I'm scared, Kelly. I'm scared of choosing wrong. I'm scared of leading us somewhere we'll regret." Kelly leaned closer, wrapping her arms around him, holding him the way she did in the earliest days of their marriage, tightly, protectively, with a love that didn't need words. Her voice cracked as she answered, "Then we choose what keeps us together, not what impresses the world." For a long moment they stayed like that, two hearts holding onto each other in the soft, golden morning light, realizing that the real decision wasn't about a house at all. It was about their family, their history, their future, and the priceless peace they had been losing piece by piece. As the first sounds of the children waking began echoing faintly from upstairs, Gil and Kelly made their choice without saying anything more. Gil stood slowly, picked up the unsigned documents, and pressed them against his chest. Kelly rose beside him, placing her hand over his. A silent unity in a moment that would shape the rest of their lives. Then, without hesitation, without regret, Gil walked to the drawer, opened it, and placed the documents inside. Not torn, not destroyed, simply put away. A reminder that they had walked close to a decision that could have changed everything, but chose love over pressure, peace over pride, and family over fear. Kelly felt tears roll down her cheeks, but they were different now. Softer, lighter. Tears that came from relief, not pain. She whispered, more to herself than to him, "We didn't lose anything. We just saved what mattered most." Gil wrapped his arm around her shoulders as the morning sun finally filled the room, warming the space that had witnessed their hardest night. And for the first time in many weeks, they both felt something return to them, something they had nearly forgotten. A sense of calm, a sense of home, a sense of being exactly where they were meant to be. As the children came downstairs, unaware of the emotional battle their parents had fought, the house once again filled with voices, footsteps, and the familiar softness of ordinary life. The $5 million dream home was still out there, beautiful, grand, untouched. But the home they already had, the home filled with memories, laughter, struggles, healing, and countless miracles, that was the place their hearts chose. And sometimes the most emotional ending isn't when a dream is reached. It's when a family realizes the dream they were chasing was already theirs. The conversation about the $5 million home began quietly, almost casually, but it didn't stay that way for long. What started as a hopeful discussion slowly grew into something far more emotional than Gil and Kelly Jo ever expected. The idea of a new beginning was exciting, but the deeper they stepped into the process, the more complicated everything became. At first, the family admired the photos, the open spaces, the beautiful windows, and the promise of a house that seemed big enough to hold every memory they would create in the years ahead. But behind the admiration, behind the excitement, there was a growing sense of uncertainty that neither Gil nor Kelly could shake off. The number, $5 million, lingered in their minds like a shadow that refused to fade, no matter how bright the dream home looked. Gil tried to stay focused, believing that this house might be the perfect step forward for their family. He imagined gatherings, holidays, grandkids running through hallways, the kind of life he hoped to give everyone he loved. But as he moved through the details, the financial demands, the responsibilities, and the long-term commitments wrapped around his thoughts like knots he couldn't untangle. He didn't show it openly, but his heart carried a heavy tension. He felt it in his chest when he woke up and again when he lay down at night. He felt it when he spoke to realtors, when he saw the children's reactions, and when he looked across the dining table at Kelly, the person he had always tried to protect from every burden. Kelly, meanwhile, felt the change happening long before Gil admitted it, even to himself. She watched him grow quieter, watched him think longer, watched him stare off into spaces where no one could follow. She knew his silence wasn't avoidance, it was the kind of silence that came from being overwhelmed. But she was struggling too. The thought of stepping into a mansion felt unreal, almost unsettling. Her heart was tied to the place they lived in now, the worn-out floors, the familiar corners, the imperfect rooms that had seen every laugh, every tear, every moment that built their family. She tried to imagine herself walking through the halls of a $5 million home, but every time she did, something inside her tightened, a fear she couldn't quite explain. She didn't want to say it out loud because she didn't want to stand in the way of a dream. She didn't want to disappoint Gil. She didn't want to seem scared of change. But inside, she was fighting emotions she didn't know how to put into words. Emotions layered with memories, responsibilities, gratitude, and a fear that something too grand could quietly pull their family away from the softness and closeness they had always shared. The children noticed small things. The way their parents spoke less during dinner, how their conversations seemed heavier than usual, how the laughter didn't come as easily. They weren't sure what was happening, but they felt the atmosphere shift, and even the youngest one sensed something important was happening behind those closed conversations about the future. As the days passed, Gil and Kelly found themselves revisiting the same questions over and over again. Is this the right time? Is this too big? Is this what our family truly needs? Are we risking too much? Are we losing something we may never get back? The weight of those questions became a silent companion, following them from morning to night. And slowly, the excitement they once felt began turning into hesitation. The house looked perfect on the outside, but emotionally, the decision grew heavier, more uncertain, more fragile. It wasn't the kind of pressure that comes from wanting more. It was the kind that comes from wanting to protect what you already have. And as the decision drew closer, the emotional storm surrounding the $5 million home deepened, pulling Gil and Kelly into a difficult place where dreams collided with reality, and hope tangled with fear in ways neither of them had expected. As the days moved further into the decision-making process, the emotional pressure surrounding the $5 million home began to deepen in a way neither Gil nor Kelly Jo had been prepared for. What had once felt like an exciting opportunity now rested over them like a weight that touched every moment of their daily lives. Sometimes softly, sometimes sharply, but always present. Gil woke up earlier than usual each morning, long before anyone else in the house stirred. He sat quietly in the living room, the familiar scent of their home wrapping around him like an old friend. The soft morning light fell across the photographs on the wall. Pictures of graduations, weddings, newborn babies, family gatherings. He let his eyes linger on them longer than he ever had before, realizing how deeply this home had become part of their story. But the more he looked, the more a painful question formed inside him. Were they about to leave behind something that couldn't be replaced? He tried to reason with himself, reminding his heart of the benefits. More space, more comfort, a new start for their growing family. Yet every good thought was followed by a quiet whisper of doubt. For the first time, he felt the decision slipping out of the realm of excitement and into something that felt almost overwhelming. Kelly Jo carried her own silent battle. She moved through the house with a kind of tenderness that came from knowing things might change soon. Every time she picked up a toy from the floor, folded a blanket, or wiped down the kitchen counter, She felt memories rising like waves. Memories she didn't know she was so attached to until now. She found herself pausing in doorways, taking deeper breaths, touching the walls as though they held stories her heart wasn't ready to let go of. She didn't want to burden Gil with her worries, and she didn't want to influence him unfairly, so she kept much of her fear locked inside, hidden behind soft smiles and gentle conversations. But her silence didn't go unnoticed. Gil saw the way her hands lingered on the banister, the way her eyes softened when she looked at the living room, the way her expression changed whenever the new house was mentioned. It wasn't sadness, it was something deeper, something heavier. A quiet mourning for a home she wasn't sure she was ready to leave. The children, though absorbed in their own busy lives, felt the shift too. Their parents seemed quieter at the dinner table, more thoughtful, less energetic. Laughter didn't bounce around the house quite the same way. Even the rhythm of the evenings felt different, slower, heavier, filled with pauses that no one tried to explain. One evening captured the turning point. Gil sat at the kitchen table, paper spread out in front of him, the numbers glaring back with a bluntness that stole his breath. He rubbed his forehead, closing his eyes for a moment as the weight of expectation pressed down on him. He wasn't just making a purchase, he was making a promise. A promise that the future he chose wouldn't harm the family he had spent his entire life protecting. Kelly entered the room quietly. She didn't say anything at first. She simply watched him, the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes, the hesitation in the way he held the pen. A soft ache rose in her chest. She had seen Gil face storms before, but this was different. This wasn't the stress of a job or a challenge or a responsibility he could overcome with hard work. This was emotional, deep, quiet, and frightening. She took a seat beside him, not touching the papers, not offering advice, just being present. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "You don't have to carry this alone." The words broke something inside him, not in a painful way, but in a way that released the truth he had been hiding. He looked at her with tired, honest eyes and whispered back, "I'm trying to be strong, but I don't know if this is the right thing for us anymore." Kelly's breath caught, not because the words surprised her, but because they matched her own unspoken fears. She placed her hand over his, her touch gentle, steady, filled with the love that had carried them through every chapter of their lives. In that moment, neither of them needed explanations. The truth lay between them plainly, quietly. The dream of the new home was losing its shine, and the emotional cost was becoming too high. The house they wanted was beautiful, but the home they already had was irreplaceable. And as the night settled around them, the unspoken understanding grew stronger. If they weren't careful, they might lose something far more precious than any home could ever offer. In the days that followed their late-night conversation, an unmistakable heaviness settled over Gil and Kelly Jo's home. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that came from arguments or conflict. It was the quiet, suffocating kind that lived in the spaces between words, in the pauses during conversations, in the way two people avoided looking too long at the same fear. Gil moved through the hours with a careful, almost strained calmness. On the outside he appeared collected, but inside, he felt something slowly unraveling. Every time he walked past the stack of documents waiting on the kitchen counter, it felt like the weight of responsibility pressed harder against his chest. The bold numbers, the signatures, the binding commitments. Everything stared back as a reminder of a future he wasn't fully sure of anymore. He spent more time outside, standing in the yard with his hands in his pockets, breathing in the air that had carried years of memories. He looked at the house with a new kind of awareness, noticing the chipped paint, the crooked fence, the worn-out steps, yet feeling a strange sense of attachment to every imperfection. Each flaw held a story he couldn't bring himself to replace. He wondered quietly, how do you walk away from a place that raised your entire life? Kelly Jo carried her fears differently. She wasn't pacing or overthinking. Instead, she grew quieter, moving through the home with a softness that almost felt like a silent goodbye. When she folded clothes, she paused longer. When she cleaned, she touched each surface as if memorizing its texture. She didn't tell anyone she was scared. She didn't have to, her silence said enough. In the afternoons when the house was still, she would sit on the edge of the bed and close her eyes, whispering small prayers for clarity, prayers that didn't ask for luxury or comfort, just peace. She wasn't sure if peace lived in a grand new house, or in the familiar walls around her. The children sensed more than they understood. Some of them texted, asking if everything was all right. Others came by more often, as if the tension called them home. They lingered longer at dinner, offered to help with chores they normally avoided, laughed a little louder in hopes of pulling their parents into the warmth. But even in those moments of togetherness, something felt different. Like everyone was trying too hard to fix a silence that didn't want to be fixed. One evening, the pressure reached a quiet breaking point. Gil sat at the table again, the documents laid neatly before him. He stared at them for so long that the lines and letters began to blur. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the commitment, but from the fear of making a choice that would ripple through every part of their family's life. He felt Kelly quietly enter the room, but he didn't look up. He heard the soft steps, the gentle pause, the long exhale, the sound of someone who had run out of ways to hide their heart. Kelly walked to the counter, opened a drawer, and took out a small old photo. A photo of their entire family crowding together in the very kitchen they stood in now. She placed it on the table beside the paperwork, letting it settle in front of Gil without a single word. In the picture, everyone was smiling, wide, natural, unburdened. The background was simple. The same uneven cabinets, the same scratches on the counter, the same imperfect home. Gil looked at the photo and everything inside him collapsed, quietly, painfully. Kelly sat down beside him. She didn't touch the papers. She didn't push him to choose. She simply placed her hand over his, grounding him with the kind of love that had carried them through every hardship and miracle. She whispered, her voice breaking even though she tried to hold it steady, "I don't want a bigger house if it means losing the peace we built here." Those words didn't ask for an answer. They offered him one. Gil closed his eyes, feeling tears he hadn't allowed himself to feel. He had carried the weight alone for too long, pretending he was strong enough to handle everything, pretending this decision didn't terrify him. But now, in this moment of raw honesty, he finally let the truth reach the surface. They were not chasing a dream. They were running away from themselves. The new house wasn't a future. It was a distraction from the fear of outgrowing the past. Kelly squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. "If this decision is tearing us apart before we've even made it, then maybe it's not the right one." Gil leaned forward, resting his forehead against their intertwined hands. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in his chest eased, not because the burden disappeared, but because he no longer held it alone. The room felt still. The air felt softer. And for the first time, the house they already owned felt like it was holding them together instead of holding them back. The paperwork remained on the table, unsigned, unmoved, unchosen. But the choice itself had already begun forming in the quiet space between their hearts, rising slowly, painfully, beautifully. The realization that sometimes the greatest kind of love is choosing the life that protects your peace, not the one that impresses the world. The conversations inside the Bates home began shifting in ways no one expected. What started as quiet late-night talks slowly turned into long, heartfelt discussions about identity, purpose, and the meaning of home. Gil and Kelly Jo had spent decades building a life defined by simplicity, faith, and the comfort of familiarity. But everything they once considered stable felt as though it was being reshaped by forces they couldn't control. The new home, priced at $5 million, stood like a symbol of both opportunity and risk. And while the world outside speculated with curiosity, inside the family, thoughts stretched far beyond money. There were concerns about letting go of a chapter that had shaped them, memories pinned to old walls, moments that lived in tiny corner spaces no one else cared about. Every child had their own memory of the old home. The laughter, the noise, the chaos that somehow kept them all close. Kelly Jo found herself torn between excitement and a kind of grief she didn't talk about openly. The thought of walking into a place so grand felt strange for a woman who had spent most of her life creating beauty out of limitations. She wanted to support Gil's vision, but she wondered if this change might pull them away from the simplicity that once defined everything they believed in. Gil, on the other hand, was carrying a pressure he never voiced. He felt responsible for every emotion, every decision, every consequence. He knew the world saw the house as a luxury, but for him it was a response to years of sacrifice, an attempt to give his wife and children the comfort they had always put aside. But in trying to provide more, he worried whether he was unintentionally taking something priceless away. What made this period so dramatic was not the financial weight of the home, but the emotional struggle surrounding it. The family had always been united, yet change, even positive change, tested the bond in unexpected ways. There were moments where the uncertainty felt overwhelming, moments where everyone seemed to cling to their own version of what home meant. And as this internal storm grew heavier, the question was no longer whether they could afford the new house. The question became whether their heart, their unity, and their story could remain untouched by the shift that lay ahead. In the final stretch of their long, uncertain journey, the Bates family found themselves standing at an emotional crossroads they never expected to face. The decision about the new $5 million home had started as a hopeful step toward the future, but now it felt like a test of everything they had ever believed in: love, sacrifice, unity, and the silent strength that had carried them through decades. The weight of the choice pressed most heavily on Gil and Kelly Jo, not because of the financial magnitude, but because they understood that moments like this shape a family for generations. They looked at their children, grown, married, scattered, yet forever tied to the heartbeat of the home they were all raised in, and felt the ache of a chapter nearing its end. For Gil, the realization came quietly. Late one evening, while the house had settled into that rare stillness that only large families truly understand, he found himself remembering the earliest days of their life together. A tiny living space, hand-me-down furniture, dreams that had felt impossibly far away. He remembered how Kelly Jo had transformed nothing into something every single time. He realized that what made their life beautiful had never been the building. It had been the love that filled it. And Kelly Jo, though she had fought to stay strong through every discussion, finally let herself feel the depth of what was happening. She understood that this new home represented years of Gil working without rest, always trying to provide more than he had been given. She saw the tenderness behind his determination, the vulnerability behind his silence, and that alone made her heart ache in a way she couldn't hide anymore. When the news spread through the family that the final decision had been made, every child responded in their own way. Some celebrated the new beginning, some felt the sting of nostalgia, some cried quietly, knowing they were witnessing the closing of the home that had shaped their entire childhood. But every emotion, every tear, every memory, brought them closer instead of apart. The truth settled slowly but powerfully. Home was never the walls, it was the people. And with that realization, the fear began to fade. The doubt began to soften. The future began to look less like a threat and more like a continuation of the same love, just carried into a different space. When the family finally gathered to acknowledge what this moment meant, the air felt heavy but sacred. There were no dramatic gestures, no grand speeches, only quiet gratitude. Gratitude for where they had been. Gratitude for where they were going. Gratitude that, despite everything, they were still walking forward together. And as Gil and Kelly Jo looked at each other, they understood something deeper than words could express. They had built a legacy, not from wealth, not from fame, but from love that had survived every season. The new home was no longer a symbol of distance or change. It became a reminder of everything they had overcome, and everything they still hoped to become. The chapter closed gently, full of emotion, full of memory, and full of the quiet certainty that no matter where life took them next, their hearts would always return to each other.